Thank you everyone for joining us for today's webinar. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. I'm lucky enough to be speaking to you today from the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people. Let us know in the chat which lands you're on today. That's fantastic. My name is Diana Rayment. I'm the Treasurer for the Australian Institute of Animal Management, and I'll be hosting, delivering the webinar for you today. Nell is not with us today, unfortunately, but she has trusted me with making sure that we get through this safely, so I will do my very best. Now, the Australian Institute of Animal Management is the national peak body representing local government animal management officers. The AIAM committee, or the board, consists of a wide range of professionals engaged in the various aspects of animal management. AIAM seeks to support those engaged in the business of animal management and the function itself by providing training and information, opportunities for networking and collaboration, and by encouraging the use of best practice policy and practices. AIAM understands the significant pressures placed on local government and related sectors services and service providers when working in the companion animal management space. We welcome new members and people can join via the website at aim.org.au. Now, on to what is happening today. It looks like we've got a good spread of people from all across the country, which is a bit exciting. Vic, there's definitely a few people from Victoria, which is great to see because this year is the domestic animal management plan year. So we're really targeting all the folks from Victoria, but we've also got some people from WA, Queensland, South Australia, even the Northern Territory. This is great, guys. Thank you very much. Now, for today, we'll have around 50 minutes of presentation and then about 10 minutes of question time before we wrap up. This webinar will be recorded and is available on the website alongside the recordings of all of our previous webinars. And you can log into the website and view those anytime you like. I'm going to ask that everybody mutes themselves during the presentation. If you've got any questions, can we start off by popping them in the webinar chat here? I have a few, I'll fess up and say I have a few windows open today and driving everything at once. We probably won't use the Q&A, we'll just use the chat so I can keep an eye on it as we go. If it is a longer question, I'll pop it off to the end and we can answer that at the end. But if it's something short that's related to the content of the time and you just want to clarify something, just pop your hand up or pop it into the chat and I'll answer it at the time. If you can unmute yourself, also just feel free to unmute yourself and let me know, just because I might be concentrating on one thing and miss it. If we don't get through all of the questions at the end, we will go through those, answer them, and then pop them up on the Facebook page or just get back to you individually. So please feel free to pop questions in or even just jump onto the Facebook page and send us a message there if it's something that you would prefer to answer just directly. Now, I'll give you a brief overview of myself and my background before we get stuck in for those who don't know me yet. My PhD research investigated the applied assessment of canine behaviour, so looking at how we can best assess dogs in, pounds, shelters, and applied assessments like aggression assessment. So when we've had a dog who's involved in an incident, I've been around the traps now for a bit over 20 years, working in research, teaching, and a bit over half of that out in this sector as well. I now work in program development at PetRescue, and I also run my own private training and consulting business with consulting to animal welfare organisations, animal management teams, and also private dog owners in aggression and dog behaviour. And I also like to keep my fingers in the applied research world, so I've got a bit going on. So let's get started today. Now, before we do get started, I just wanted to flag this fantastic webinar that Leslie Humphreys did for us in November last year. If you haven't seen that, I would encourage you to log on and watch this webinar. Essentially, it's all about how to really use domestic animal management plans or strategic plans to very effectively advocate for kind of resources and the support that you need internally within your council, and also how to start creating that back and forth conversation with your community so that you can get the support that you need from your residents to make the changes that you want to make and to kind of start implementing those animal management services that will actually help move everybody in the right direction, while also having those be well accepted and supported by the community. Now, if there's one key takeaway that I would really love for you to take from both Leslie's webinar and this one today, it is that there is actually no easy one-size-fits-all animal management plan that's going to work for a council in the middle of Melbourne, somebody in rural New South Wales, you guys up in the NT, over in WA. It just doesn't work that way, because each community and each local laws team will be facing their own kind of challenges and barriers, and will also have access to different resources and opportunities. And the pressures that are on your council and your managers are going to be quite different. So while there will be some consistency with your neighbours, particularly the kind of councils that are close by, they have different councillors, they have different managers, they have oftentimes different pockets in their community. And so you'll still need to tailor things, even if they're quite similar to the councils that are close by to you. Now, what we're aiming to do with the template, though, is to make that tailoring easy, or as easy as it can be. So today, we are going to go on a bit of a tour of this document. Now, essentially, we created this document in 2022-23 to meet two core demands from our members. One being that in Victoria and South Australia, animal management plans in their various forms are a mandatory requirement. And so helping members be able to meet those compliance requirements is important for us. But we also wanted to develop a tool that animal management teams can really use to tailor their own services, advocate internally, like I said, and help to make something that is really can be quite complex and a little bit of a struggle sometimes, because it's not a small job, right? So we wanted to try and make this as easy as we can, or at least so that you have as much support as you can have going through this process. Now, our goal in making this document was to create it with enough breadth to be able to apply it all across Australia. So if you're in a rural area or you are in a city area, there should be content in here that actually works for you well. The template itself was developed to make sure it was compliant with both Victorian and South Australian legislation. But we also wanted to balance the amount of detail that we've got in here and the resources that we provide without it being super overwhelming. So it did turn into a bit of a behemoth. It's 56 pages long. And the first time you open it, if you haven't opened it yet, it can be a little bit overwhelming because there's just lots and lots of text. So today, what we're going to do is kind of go through those main bits and hopefully simplify that a little bit. Now, the document itself, the first 11 pages are explanatory notes. So that is essentially, if you've never done this before, if you're new to a kind of leadership role and you haven't done a animal management plan, start there and read through those. There's some suggested content, and there's also a big chunk of resources at the back. So the template itself sits in the middle and is not the whole 56 pages. And during the process of creating this, it was a relatively long process, and we made sure that we regularly put the drafts out to the sector, the broader sector, and got feedback the whole way through, which again made it quite long, but it also means it should be easy to kind of pick and choose the bits that you want. And there may be whole sections like the domestic animal businesses section, which is, I think, section 5 in the template, that you can just remove. Because if you're not in Victoria, it's not a requirement for you. If it works for you, though, please feel free to keep it in. So it's a very tailorable document. You pick from it what you need. Now, we'll get into the nitty-gritty. So the guidance information itself, like I said, are those first 11 pages. And that essentially covers what is normally in an animal management plan or a strategic plan for an animal management department. What those kind of key, I suppose, guiding principles, and we'll talk about those in a sec, are when you're actually creating an animal management plan, what your considerations need to be. So, and when I say that, there's considerations from all of the different potential stakeholders. So internally, your department, your counsellors, and what their particular kind of motivations and primary goals are in animal management for your particular community, your community itself, your service providers within your community, and even within your own team. It could be that there are particular things that you can kind of leverage. You might have some really awesome team members who are great with the soft skills of the people, and some other team members who are really great with the detail required to do investigations and really work up your prosecutions. And in those cases, you really want to look at all of that and think, okay, cool, where are we actually at? What is the big picture and all of that stuff that we need to be bringing into this plan, which will start really big, and then you can kind of narrow it down from there. And assessing the current capabilities of your team is also part of this kind of initial process. So particularly in some of the smaller councils, but I know there's at least a couple of the kind of metropolitan councils in Melbourne whose animal management teams at the moment are pretty small. That's something that you need to acknowledge in your plan. And that is something that needs to be built in so that you can actually use this plan to advocate internally to get those resources that you need. So it's not a bad thing to be able to say, yep, cool, this is where we're currently at. This is what we've got, and this is therefore what we're capable of in a document that will be made public. It just needs to be factual, objective, and you need to basically be able to say, here's where we are, here's where we want to be, and this is what our current capabilities are, and this is the gap. So that way you've actually got something that you can go to your higher ups and say, this is what we need. If you want this big picture and you sell your big picture really well, this is what we need from you in order to make that happen. And this guidance information really kind of helps step you through the process of how to do that. Now, the best practice part of this, the really tricky thing about best practice in the animal management space and in the animal welfare space, in the companion animal space altogether, is that it changes incredibly quickly. There isn't really one go-to place that you can go and say, yep, this is best practice and this will be best practice for the foreseeable future. Therefore, this is what we're going to do. And that really puts a bit of pressure on yourself as the people. I'm assuming that the people in the room here will probably be writing companion animal plans, management plans, doing the development and the writing of these, but also on your team. Because when you're pedaling every day, it's not that easy to set time aside and get yourself into the headspace to be like, okay, what has the world shown us about domestic cat management in the last 12 or 18 months? What's the world shown us about how to deal with dog attacks and how we can best prevent those in the last couple of years? Those two things can often really compete for your time and your attention. And again, this kind of plan and the process of making this plan is the opportunity for that person who's really driving the team to sit back and say, okay, I'm switching gears from the day to day to let's actually work out what's going on right now, and apply that best practice knowledge that we've got at this particular point in time and create that evidence-based document that we can use if in the next 2 years, 3 years, something pops up. We all know that councils can be quite sensitive to public feedback, particularly if that involves scrutiny, and particularly for emotionally laden kind of topics like what is going on with people's companion animals. So what we want is this document that follows these best practice principles, because while the actual nitty-gritty of what you do and what best practice looks like changes very regularly, the principles that underlie best practice are the same everywhere, not just in companion animal management, but in all of the different kind of areas where people work and do things. Now, they are best practice is efficient and effective. So we don't want to be spending resources doing things that don't actually achieve our goals. It's evidence-based. So it's not just what we think is good, it's what we can actually show is good based on good, solid evidence from external parties that other people can also look at and objectively assess. It's ethical. And this can be a bit of a tricky one, particularly in the space of animal management and animal welfare, because what some people think is great welfare, others might not agree with. There are two great documents that we've linked in here. So the NACA Code of Ethics, and there is a Justice Clearinghouse webinar called The Connection Between Personal and Organisational Ethics that are good places to go, and good reference documents for you, to have a bit of a breadth of understanding, I suppose, and be able to refer back and say, yeah, cool, this is what is considered ethical at this point in time. All things considered, this is the right thing. And they're broadly supported. So best practice as a general rule, not everybody is going to like what is happening, but the majority of your community should be able to see value in what you're doing. And that can fall over in different ways if people don't understand what you're doing, and they, are being influenced by, social media, local, journalists, and the way things are reported, particularly following dog attacks, or at the moment in the cat management space, there's a lot of big opinions going around. That can really influence how broadly supported, particular practices are. That said, though, part of this and part of opening that two-way conversation with your particular communities is using this document and using this opportunity to say, look, here is where we're at. This is the context and the environment in which we're working. This is the resources that we've got, and this is why we've chosen to go this way. So that Joe average member of the community, who's a reasonable person, can just read this and go, yeah, cool, that makes sense. That's something that I'm actually okay with and I'm happy to support. And then that small minority who won't necessarily agree because of their own motivations and their own kind of beliefs and biases, they're the small minority, right? That broad support is really what you're looking for. Now, the template itself essentially is, we've got these 4 sections within the template. So it is broken up into 6, I think, or 7 major sections, each of which has subsections within it. And you've got these section numbers and headings at the top. What I'd suggest you do is, in the first instance, when you open it up, have a look through it, have a look at each of the sections and the subsections and be like, yep, cool, want that, swipe left, swipe right, want it, don't need domestic animal business, get rid of the whole of section 5 or whatever it is, and start creating or bulking out your kind of template from there, those headings. Within each of the sections, you've then got this black text and it says instructions to be deleted. And basically those instructions tell you what goes into that section. So sometimes it's quite short, like the example that you can see on the screen. And some of those black sections are quite long because the information required is actually a little bit chunky for those bits. Fill out what you need, delete it. The red sections are extras, right? So basically this is it could be, this is specific for a particular state or a particular area, or if you live in a certain type of community, this is something that's really good for you. Could be a useful tool like, the kind of census data. That can be a great place to go and get some information about your human community. They are kind of the added extras, and they might be useful for you or they might not, but again, you need to delete them. Now, the boxes at the bottom, there's essentially 2 ways that animal management plans, or the content of animal management plans, are normally presented and formatted within the main document. So one is dot points, and within each of the blue boxes, you'll see examples of dot point kind of content. The other is in tables, so where you've got your objective, so what you're trying to achieve, the actions, and then how you're going to measure them. And you can pick and choose which of those 2 types of formatting you actually prefer. And my experience has been that whatever works well for your brain is what's going to work best for your document. Because if you would really prefer a table, but you're going to go with the list type, things can sometimes tend to not flow, or vice versa. So essentially within all of those blue boxes, you've just got some examples of what, content for that particular section might look like in a dot point and in a table form. And then you can either just delete the content out of it. Obviously, if there's something in there that you're like, yeah, that sounds like what we're doing or what we want to achieve, tweak it so that it suits your particular council area and your team. Now, we're going to quickly go through the major sections in the report so that you can kind of see and you're a little bit more familiar with those. First up is the introduction and the development of the plan. So depending on where you are, in Victoria, you actually have to include a bit of a methodology about what you actually did while you were developing your plan, who you consulted. You need to include a list of stakeholders. You need to ideally reference out if you have, done a survey of your community members, talking about, what they're trying to get an idea of what their opinions about animal management practices are for you. Link that, talk about those results. This is really about helping whoever it is that picks up that document to understand why you're doing it, what the kind of framework and the context that you're working within is. So you might reference your council's strategic plan. You might reference if your planning department has their own information around dog parks, you might reference that because that could actually have an impact on what you do in open space. This is really where you're like, this is what we're doing. This is the context in which we're doing it and the things that we have to keep in mind. And this is what the steps that we actually took when we created this plan so that somebody else can, again, come along and have a good understanding of where you're at and what the pressures on you are, what resources you've got, all of those things before they start looking at your proposed actions. Now, once you've done that, what you want to do is introduce them to your community. There's two different sides to this. One is the people and one is the pets, right? So essentially what we want to do is include information in here that is relevant to the decisions that you've made in all of your proposed actions and in how you actually engage with your community. So it's great to turn around and say, okay, we've got a community of, this many 100,000 people. This is how big our municipality is. This is what proportion of that is, urban, metro, regional, rural. What is probably a bit more relevant is, this is what percentage of our community, if you've got kind of a large portion of people who speak multiple languages or have a different primary language, that needs to be included because it could be that when you go to your community education section, you're like, yeah, cool, we've got these resources or we're pulling these resources from our state government, but also we have a really large, Indian community or people who speak, whatever language it is that they speak. And therefore what we're going to do is take these, get them translated, and then wrap that messaging up in a form that's actually useful for our community because English might not actually be a really useful way. Or it could be that, your community has pockets of kind of areas with people who have got lower levels of education and big written, flyers or kind of written pamphlets are actually not very good. So it could be that you're like, yeah, cool, great, pamphlets are fantastic, but also what we're going to do is spend our budget on education on making some videos because that could actually be the thing that works best for your community. And this is where you introduce the idea of this is who our people are, this is who we're working with, and these are the really important things you need to know about them so that when we're talking later on about what we're proposing, you know why. With your pets, it's pretty much the same thing. So if you've got a whole bunch of people who live in apartments, it could be that you need a lot of open space so that they can actually get their dogs out. If you have, you've got a lot of cats in their community because they're coming into your, your holding facilities and your shelters, but you've actually got a really low percentage of cats that are registered and registration is a requirement for your state, then you're like, okay, cool. We don't know how many cats are out there. We just know there's more than what we've actually got on the books. This is something that's relevant to us and the decisions that we're going to make about cats and cat management in our area. So it's not really a pull some information, throw some generic stuff in. It's about helping people understand who your community is and what are the bits of that information that are really relevant to you and to the reader to understand what's going on. Next major section is your department. So this is where we take the time to really introduce your department, have a look, have a nice critical analysis of, again, who your team are, essentially what that kind of potential gap is between where your team currently is and where you want them to be, what's been working really well, what hasn't been working really well, what are the key metrics that you've been using to assess your success up until this point in time, and have they been useful? Like it could be that you've been, and all councils do it, hopefully all councils do it, but you're keeping an eye on the complaints about different topics, which is great, right? But you could implement an action and your complaint level goes up purely because you're actually bringing a topic or a potential problem to people's attention. So it's not actually that there is more of a problem. It could be that with a different measure, you can actually see that there's fewer problems with, dog attacks or, cats or whatever the situation is, but you're actually getting more complaints, right? Because people are just really aware of it and they're just constantly contacting you. So if you're just looking at that one really crude measure, what you're going to find is that you're actually missing a whole lot of information that would give you enough resolution to make a decision about whether or not this is a good or a bad thing for you to be doing. This is the section where you talk about those things. What have we done? Did it work? How did we assess our level of success or not success? And what are those kind of gaps? If it went wrong, where did it go wrong? Or what do we just don't know? Because if there's big sections that you don't know, they're things that you should be including as proposed actions. How are we going to learn that information? Next section is what you're proposing to do, right? So you've said, okay, this is who we are. This is our community. This is our team. These are all the things that are impacting us and the frameworks that we need to work within when we're actually doing our job. And now we go into, this is actually what we want to do for the next 3, 5, however many years. We generally suggest that you actually keep these animal management plans over a kind of mid-range period of time. They're a lot of work to do every 1 or 2 years, but what is very relevant now will not be relevant in 6 or 7 years' time. So 3, 4, 5 years, if you have the flexibility, is a good time period with assessments in between, and we'll have a bit of a chat about that later. Now, within this big section, our plan, there are, I think, 9 subsections, and each of them cover different aspects of your domestic animal management. So owner education and behaviour change, domestic cat management, lost pet management, management of pets in public spaces, disaster responses, all of those different things have got their own sections. And each of those sections is designed like we kind of spoke about with that original template. So you've got some instructions, some tips, and then some suggested content. And in each of those sections, what you ideally want to be including is these 5 key talking points. So in that assessment that you did of what you've been doing previously, what did you find? It could be that in the last 5 years, you've actually, Bendigo, I'll give a shout out to Bendigo, have done some awesome work in the desexing programs, right? And so essentially what they found is by implementing these, low cost, very accessible desexing programs, they've been able to drive down their intake of cats and dogs into bark really significantly. Great, keep it up. right? If that's what you found in your assessment, is that you did this thing, you've got a fantastic result from that. That is a very strong finding. And it could be that you are like, this is what we did, this is what it costs, this is how, there could be some tweaks that we want to make, but great. Or it could be that in your assessment process, you're like, we actually don't know enough about this in order to say what we should be doing, in order to actually give us some good, strong direction. So what did you find in your assessment process? What are you proposing? And what is that going to cost? And obviously there'll be a bit of flexibility about that. But that's really one of the main things that you need to know. You need to be able to say, okay, this is what we're proposing to do. This is what the actual numbers say. This is how much it's actually going to cost, because that's how you advocate to everybody about. They're like, yeah, cool, this sounds like a great plan. You're like, sweet, cough up this much money. Thank you very much. How are you actually proposing to achieve that? And how are you going to assess your success? So what are those things that you're actually going to be, what are those metrics you're going to be looking at along the way, so that in 3, 4, or 5 years' time, you can reassess and say, yep, that worked, or no, it didn't, and then make changes in the future. Almost at the end of the template, review and reporting. Now, this is actually a surprisingly important part of the process. While we don't suggest that you have an animal management plan that pops up, that you need to do every, couple of years, even 3 years, is depending on how small your team is and what your resources are, is probably a little bit short. What you should have is finite times in which you actually look at those metrics that you've got set up. You know what I mean? You've said, okay, our cat management, the primary thing that we're going to do is, targeted cat desexing, and then we'll have a, low-key trapping, trap and remove, rehome. That comes in as the secondary way that we're actually going to be managing cats. We're going to be measuring complaints, intake into our area, the number of cats that we actually do intake that are kittens or non-desexed, young cats, because they're really that intake of those cats is what's telling you whether you've got good reproductive control over your population. And also how many cats we've got microchipped and registered in our area. So what we're trying to do is drive up the number of owned cats, drive down the number of undersexed, unowned cats, and these are the metrics that we're going to look. And you don't want to look at them only every however many years that you're doing your domestic animal management plan. You want to look at them at 6 or 12-month intervals. So these are the metrics we're going to look at. This is the time frame we're going to look at them on. And then we are potentially going to make XYZ changes based on those metrics as we go along. So it could be that we're like, yep, cool, sexing program seems to be working really well in this one little area we're doing it. Great, we need to make it wide. It could be, what can sometimes happen is that you find, particularly, there are some kind of details around desexing programs where you're not actually reaching your target audience, right? So we're finding people who would be desexing their cats anyway, and we're desexing those cats. So we're substituting whatever vet services they would use for the ones that we provide, but we're still not getting to those cats that we need. How are we going to tweak our approach so that we can reach the people and the cats that we want to be reaching? So making sure you've got a bit of a plan for how you're going to do that and include that here. Obviously, that the logic for this is kind of quite obvious in that it helps you actually do your job. But also what this does is helps to create trust. So when you've got a manager or you've got a counsellor who goes and they look at all of this and they say, okay, if we give you however many hundreds of thousands of dollars, we can look at this and we can see that you've really thought about it and you're actually paying a lot of attention to whether or not your proposed actions are efficient and are effective and are using our money well, so that if something does pop up with our community and they do, something pops up and somebody in your local paper starts talking about how much money they're spending on animal management services, they're looking at it and they're going, no, here you go. We have a very solid case for this. We know that this is being spent well. We know that our team is actually doing what they're doing, and there's transparency about this. So it's actually a really important part, even though it's a bit boring. Now, where to find the document? Essentially, you just log onto the website, jump into the member resources, and it's the very last thing at the bottom of the list. And it essentially comes out as a PDF, but you can copy and paste from it. So you can have the PDF sitting there, copy and paste the relevant stuff across into your document, and you're good to go. There are also, you can see them here, the metrics and data collection resources and the cat management resources are worthwhile having a look at too, especially if you are not using population management software for the animals that you take into care. So oftentimes you'll be able to pull, job locations, job numbers, all of those things from your pathways or your Tech One, whatever your actual council job management survey is, or your customer management tools. But the actual information that you need about the population of animals that you're bringing into care, that will help you make some decisions there. If you don't have Shelter Buddy or Animal Shelter Manager or one of those kind of bits of software that you can plug in and say, give me this report, and it spits out the numbers that you need. These two lots of resources from the website can be very helpful. One being the AIAM sample data spreadsheet, which is basically just a Google Sheets document or a, my brain's gone. The Office version, Excel, document that you can use, and you can either host it on a cloud so everybody can pop details on, or you can have it as a, just local document. And that has all the relevant information that you need about the animals you're bringing into care, and some kind of drop downs to make it a little bit easier. And then there's a guidance document that goes with that to actually help you look at that data and pull what you need from it. We've got a webinar again. So this type of webinar where we went through these documents, Nell and myself, to say this is what they are, this is how you access them, this is how you use them. And with the cat management resources, essentially we just keep adding to that over time. So the most recent ones are much newer than 2021. And we also have a local government cat management forum that by all means you are welcome to join if you are currently working in local government. So it's not open to all members, it's only open to members who are working in local government. And essentially we meet 3-4 times a year and sit down and actually get everybody in a room, have a chat about the kind of challenges and your key learnings in the domestic cat management space. And if that's something that you're interested in doing, please email Nell at secretary at AIM, and she'll be able to get you onto the list and let you know when the next meeting is coming up. Questions? So I might just stop screen sharing at the moment so I can see everybody, and hopefully this helps. And did anybody kind of have any questions or thoughts going into? Maybe I'll ask a question and I'll see if the attendees, if anybody's got, have, particularly for Victorian folks, how far are you into your process of creating your domestic animal management plans this year? Because we're only in March, but the year will go quickly. So did anybody have any, I suppose, challenges or thoughts? How are you going with that this year? And I might just allow people to talk. Just allowing everybody to talk. So if anybody wants to jump off mute, instead of having to type, we are good. And thanks, Felicity. Okay. Well, our current plan expires 2026. Oh, fantastic. So you've got some time. So Kelly's just popped in the chat that the current plan expires in 2026. Good. Gives yourself plenty of time, and hopefully this will be of help. We will be looking to update particularly the resources at the end, and just to double check. I'm not sure where you are, Kelly, but if you're in Victoria and South Australia, just double check that everything is still compliant. But there are links at the top of the links at the start of the document to all of the relevant legislation, so you can double check that if you get started before we've had the chance to update. Zoe, the Local Government Domestic Cat Management Forum is that discussion group for AIM members who are in local government. So if you email Nell, she'll know what you're talking about. So yeah, just ask to be added to the forum. Cool. It looks like we are all good, and we have wrapped up nice and early. So I will let everybody get back to your days. Like I said at the start, if you've got any questions, feel free to reach out. Oh, Alex has popped her hand up. So before we go, Alex, I think you should be able to unmute you.
Yeah, hi everyone. Just for some context, I'm from Animal Welfare Victoria, so the Victorian state government. So we kind of oversee all the DAMPs coming in for the Victorian councils. There has been some confusion with some councils having done their previous plan to cover kind of 2022 to 2026, but the majority have done 2021 to 2025. I did just want to clarify, and we will be sending out more information shortly, that the plans that are submitted by December this year should be covering 2026 to 2029. So because they are submitted in December, really the DAMP should be covering the calendar years of 26, 27, 28, and 29, which does make it a 4-year plan. There is sometimes some confusion because if you think of kind of 2021 to 2025, that could actually be a 5-year plan if you're counting the full calendar years of all of those years. So it should really be 2026 to 2029, but we will be getting in contact with all councils about that. If your plan kind of was meant to end in 2026, the advice we've been given is that you can just kind of roll over any of those things that weren't being planned to implement until 2026 into the new DAMP that starts in 2026. It doesn't matter if there is a bit of overlap there.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. And Western Ranges-Shire. Oh, fantastic. Susan, I am actually located in the Macedon Ranges, so I will be keeping an eye out. Great. Fantastic. Okay, so with that, I will let everybody get back to their days and their lunch breaks. And yeah, feel free to get in touch. And we'll go from there. Thanks, everybody. Bye.